English translation 722nd contact. Part 1, Thursday, the 8th of August, 2019, 20:07 hours.
Here I am, Ptaah, dear friend. Greetings, my son. You are here early, but that is good, because it means we can go outside for a little while, where I want to show you something.
Greetings also, Edouard, dear friend. Then let us go at once.
Our little walk did us good, but now I have some things we should talk about. You know that my childhood friend Ernst Meyerhofer is still traveling the world in his old age. I thought he had died somewhere in Brazil. The last time I heard from him was when he telephoned me from there. Now, however, I have received a letter from him from Idaho, USA, namely this one, which I would like you to read.
Dear friend Eddie, greetings. Old warhorse. Today I am still in the USA. Tomorrow that I will probably already be in Canada, but I would like to say something once that you should please publish in one of your bulletins and on the internet, because I think that what I want to mention is necessary and should be brought to the public. Again and again, I have the opportunity to follow everything that you and your comrades in arms publish on the internet, and I think that I should also contribute something, like the following, which you can use as you wish. This must once be said: all the natural disasters, contempt for humanity, irresponsible leadership of all states, terror and crime, inhumanities and religious and governmental madness that is happening on Earth today and will also happen in the future, will inevitably have very bad consequences in the coming years and decades. And everything has been triggered so far, and will also be triggered in the future, by overpopulation and its destructive actions on the Earth planet, on nature and the entire plant and animal world. And this is equivalent to the destruction of the Earth. In addition to the mass population, all destructions are preceded by the wrongly pursued politics worldwide, as especially by the world greed addiction of the USA and the EU dictatorship. It is mainly the dictators and the wrong leadership of the states, by the government incapable state powers, and politicians of all states of the earth, who should bear the responsibility for everything, but who bear the greatest guilt for the whole disaster. Already in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, as well as again and again since then, Billy has tirelessly written warnings to countless media in the world, as he himself has publicly spread warnings and predictions. For this he was only laughed at, and instead of thanks, he was given ignorance, as he was also insulted and slandered, and moreover, more than 20 times attempts were made to assassinate him. Deliberately, his prophecies and warnings were thrown to the wind because no one wanted to deal with the truth, and so it is today, because no one wants to hear the truth. It is the case that everything he prophesied through his predictions for the first time already 70 years ago and again since then has been coming true for quite some time now. And also today, because everything is currently being fulfilled and will also be fulfilled in the future. Billy and his warnings are still disregarded and frowned upon today, while little Greta Thunberg is listened to and climate demonstrations are carried out for her sake. Although neither this child nor those demonstrating because of the climate really know what they are actually demonstrating and shouting about and causing a lot of damage. This proves that these demonstrators are all not only pathologically simple-minded and stupid, but also completely ignorant, blind and completely blinded to the real facts. All of them have no idea of how and by what manifold donkey acts. Everything on Earth, including the climate, has been ruined by the massively overpopulated Earth. The reality is that the small and ignorant Greta Thunberg from Sweden and all the stupid demonstrators she has stirred up who are campaigning for climate protection that is incomprehensible to them, or who are simply running along and shouting along because it is fun for them, do not have the slightest idea of what the actual causes of climate destruction are. In fact, it is not climate change, but actual climate destruction. That's why the authorities and scientists should provide comprehensive information to clear the air for the demonstrators, but that's probably not going to happen. And what I want to say to you now, because it will just be the case that neither the authorities nor the scientists will do anything of this kind. Dear friend Eddie, I ask you to uncover the truth about this for once, which you can certainly do best by talking to your friend Ptaah about it. He and you know best how reality looks, and what is the real truth hidden in everything. What you have explained to me in this regard, you should really also discuss with your friend Ptaah, and also make it public. Stay healthy and well, and greetings from your friend, Ernst Meyerhofer, currently still in Idaho, USA.
What your friend writes regarding the climate demonstrators and Greta Thunberg is of correctness, to which I also have something to say, namely that I have made an effort to observe the child, the demonstrators, and various government figures in order to judge their attitude, nature, and behavior. Unfortunately, my observations in this regard are not of the good, because in the meantime Greta has fallen prey to a delusion of importance and arrogance, which was to be feared from the beginning, as you also predicted yourself. Neither the child nor those demonstrating about the climate have any idea what they are actually going out on the streets and shouting about. The same applies to those in power who are now only agitating, talking big and making themselves important because they are afraid of being verbally or physically attacked by the demonstrators' protests, or that they might lose their well-paid office, their prestige, and their power. In fact, it is as Ernst writes, which is why it is important to talk about it in an enlightening way, as he urges you to do.
I was also thinking that, but I would like to ask you something first. Namely, whether it would be appropriate, and you could agree to cite something of your father Svath's predictions first, before we get to the actual conversation. Moreover, you said the other day that the time is now approaching when Svath's early statements will also begin to be fulfilled in this relationship, which also relate to epidemics and pandemics. In this connection, moreover, insects, vermin and animals etc. are to be introduced into Europe by means of goods transports by lorries, passenger cars, parcel post, ships, railways and aeroplanes from Africa or the south of Europe, as well as from the American continent and from Asia, which may cause diseases, epidemics and infections, etc. While these are predictions that I have known since the 1940s from Svath, which I have also written about, and which will inevitably come true. My interest is really in what you think about this in terms of what is circulating, that all exotic plants are to be destroyed and eradicated in Switzerland. And that includes all those that are not invasive and have been established in Switzerland for decades, or for 1, 2, or 3 centuries and are thriving without proliferating.
That is indeed the case, as you say, because various insects, animals, plants and creatures, etc. have been introduced into Europe. Just as legally non-invasive plants, such as shrubs, bushes, and trees, have always been introduced and are thriving in Switzerland and also throughout Europe, and are not causing any invasive problems. And this is so contrary to the untrue claims of InfoFlora, whose claims and information I consult from time to time at InfoFlora, which is the National Data and Information Center of the Swiss flora, which keeps a blacklist of plants that are alleged to be invasive or otherwise harmful to native flora. What InfoFlora calls invasive neophytes does not always correspond to reality, but to unfounded illogical assumptions and unreal fears, as well as hysteria and stupidity due to a misunderstanding of the laws of nature and the concerns related to rampant invasive neophytes and exotic plant genera and species. To want to destroy and eradicate non-invasive neophytes, which have long since become accustomed to the Swiss and European climate, and which are harmless to the indigenous flora and thrive well, is absolutely ill-considered and nonsensical, especially because these plants will find new places to grow in Europe in the coming times as a result of the unstoppable change in the climate. And this will happen through a natural seed flight and a natural immigration through the bringing in and carrying or transferring by likewise immigrating exotic animals, birds and creatures, etc. of various genera and species. For this reason, too, it is nonsensical to destroy and eradicate non-invasive alien or exotic plants that have already settled, because change and natural resettlement will sooner or later occur inexorably. The nonsense of destroying and eradicating non-invasive plants, such as bushes, shrubs, and trees, which have been thriving in Switzerland and throughout Europe for a long time and have become accustomed and acclimatized, is based in a pathologically founded hysteria and stupidity of not using reason and rationality.
Thanks, then that is also clear. But now why I wanted to talk to you today. And I will do so now. Concerns on the one hand what my friend Ernst would like me to do, and for that I could cite some of what I learned from your father Schwath in the 1940s.
What my father taught you at that time regarding the emerging climate change, which is now actually emerging in a worse way that should indeed come up, and I would like to add something to that from his annals. His predictions, as he taught you in this regard, have long been proving the correctness of his warnings, which I know from his annals. With regard to all the destruction to and on the earth, to nature and to all life of the fauna and flora, the atmosphere and the climate through the irresponsible machinations of the far too abundant mass of Earth humans or overpopulation, damage has occurred which cannot be repaired. And all these Earth human irresponsibilities continue unabated, and what is more, are getting worse and worse, with every single new Earth human being that is born. Therefore, it is urgently necessary to state facts about this for once, which are denied by a certain part of irresponsible climatologists. Environmental protection organizations, geologists and agrologists, etc., who deny reality and its truth because they do not treat the facts or treat them only superficially.
You can, of course, recite something from the annals of your father Schwath if you like.
I will gladly do that and recite what you corrected together the other day if you can find it for me from your computer and I can recite it aloud.
Of course, just a moment. This is what you mean, or...
Yes, but let me look for it myself. Yes, it must be on these pages somewhere.
This is from May 1946, that's when...
Yes, and I have already found what I am looking for. So I will read it out right away.
Note: Bernadette Brand. Excerpt from Contact Conversation with Schwath, the 5th of May 1946. Pleiadian Pleiaren Contact Reports, Volume 15, pages 150-153.
In the future, a great many human beings will become enemies among themselves, as well as more and more incapable of living and indifferent in every way, from which also work shyness, fraud, and thievery will arise, and many criminals will become burglars, murderers, and robbers. Others again, as in ancient times, are afflicted by boundless hatred against acquaintances, friends, their own family members, and against neighbors, people of other faiths, foreigners, and other peoples. The racial mania built up in the Nazi Empire will continue in an expanding manner and be carried far into the third millennium, whereby a great many innocent human beings will continue to be murdered worldwide by the most diverse racial mania movements. In the coming decades, and also far into the third millennium, many human beings will become degenerated, blind, fanatic believers and followers of religions and sects, bloodthirsty, dehumanized, and murdering family fanatics, as well as murderous mania believers of terrorist organizations operating worldwide. And from these will also emerge many murderers, especially from the 1990s and well into the third millennium, who, as individuals or in groups, will carry out assassinations, murder campaigns, as well as suicide bombings, and in this way murder masses of innocent human beings. Women, children, juveniles, and men of all ages. In this way, terrorism will spread worldwide and bring many deaths upon uninvolved and innocent human beings, which will briefly affect many of earthly humanity in their thoughts and feelings, but will not really make them reflect, as has always been the case. Even the most gruesome, murderous, and catastrophic events and occurrences will touch, seize, and stir human beings in their thoughts and feelings for only a short time, as has always been the case, after which everything will be quickly forgotten again without any real profound stirring and shaking in their senses, which could lead them to do something, at least tentatively, to counteract the evils. And this also refers to the fact that human beings live indifferently into the day and into time and do not give any serious thought to life, to all events, to everything that exists, as well as to all life importances. On the other hand, it also refers to the fact that in the times to come, far into the third millennium, as a result of the rapid passing away of thoughts and feelings concerning bad events and facts such as catastrophic human deformities, deadly and destructive events, and degenerating machinations as a result of overpopulation, ever worse consequences will result. And due to the unstoppable increase in overpopulation, vicious, dramatic and mutating changes, as well as deadly and destructive factors, will occur in the future on the planet, the seas, and all continental waters, as well as on the land and all forms of life. The health and behavior of human beings will also degenerate into disease and harm and lead to many and varied deaths, just as the climate will also be affected and catastrophically altered by the effects of irresponsible machinations arising from overpopulation. And with regard to the entire fauna and flora, with regard to the planet itself, and with regard to all things of life and the existence of all things, it results that finally the destructive effects in every respect can no longer be controlled, can no longer be reversed, and can no longer be stopped, and thereby the entire earthly existence is called into question. And if the humanity of Earth is not brought to stop the growth of the degenerating overpopulation in order to avoid further disaster in this way and to reduce the already existing one, then the final catastrophe of doom will be unavoidable. But if catastrophic events now occur, such as acts of murder and mass murder by individuals or by groups of terrorists, or by depressed, jealous, hateful, criminal human beings with mental or consciousness disorders, then many rulers and other responsible persons of all states will also be affected by them. But their majority will, as since time immemorial, only utter dishonest, unrelated and hypocritical expressions of sympathy and other big words when murderous acts are carried out by individual human beings or murderous actions by whole groups. It will not matter whether the deeds are carried out by depressed or otherwise mentally or psychologically ill perpetrators, the confused, the hate-stressed, racists or terrorists, because, as a rule, as has always been the case, the condolences and sympathies of those in power and those otherwise responsible will be nothing but lies, deception and pretense, and alien to sincerity and honest compassion. So the appearance and presence of the rulers, state powers, and responsible persons at terrible places of events will only be of use to them and for the preservation of their office, as will their words and promises, which for those affected by suffering will only be deceit, trickery, lies, deception, and empty words, as this has been the case since time immemorial. And just as the majority of those in power in the state and all the other people in positions of Responsibility will only make empty promises and make stupid speeches in the case of the many murder incidents that occur by individual perpetrators or by terrorist groups. This will also be the case in many other relationships. So it will happen in the same way in the coming decades and far into the third millennium, when the natural catastrophes already in the offing today will occur, the origin of which will be traced back to the nature as well as planet and climate-destroying machinations of overpopulation. All this will be irreparable and will also claim countless human lives, cause enormous destruction, and ultimately lead to hardship, misery, diseases, epidemics, lack of space, food and water spreading over the entire earth and humanity in such a way that nothing can be done to stop it. And when this time comes, if earthly humanity does not return to the path of sound mind and reason within a foreseeable and useful period of time, then there will be no more help. But this also means that if the growth of overpopulation is not stopped and rigorously reduced by birth control and brought to a normal and planetary level in the foreseeable future, if a worldwide state of peace, extensive freedom and comprehensive security for the planet and its nature, as well as for all life, is not finally created, then an end to the advanced civilizations of earthly humanity will be inevitable. It will take time until then, but it will be inevitable if overpopulation and everything else that endangers the entire earthly life of the planet and all living beings is not stopped. Unfortunately, however, this will not be the case in the coming decades, and also far into the third millennium. And this will not be the case even if you compose your letters and send them to all governments, media, and important organizations. But if you do your work, little by little, people will come together, group themselves, and learn your teachings worldwide. Endeavor to follow them, learn to live them, and begin to spread them, from which the hope will arise that in 800 to 900 years, very many human beings will slowly endeavor to use their intellect and reason quite consciously and turn to the teachings which you will henceforth write down on a large scale, spread them, and teach them to human beings. But you must know that this will be an exceptionally heavy and very difficult task and work, which you will have to fulfill in a world that is very hostile to you with regard to your mission, because in this world human beings are misled, unfree, enslaved and enslaved by religions and sects, but also addicted to know-it-alls, habits, self-importance, vices and addictions, as well as vanity, delusions of grandeur and delusions of faith in many respects, etc. And as it has been up to now, it will also be in the future, and to an ever-increasing degree, as a result of the unstoppable increase in overpopulation for a long time to come. It is clear that in the coming decades up to the third millennium, as far into the future, there will be an increasing number of people as a result of the overpopulation, which will continue to increase inexorably for a long time to come. More and more human beings will become addicted to alcohol, drugs, and jealousy, greed for money, violence, sexual abuse of children and women, rape, and also prostitution, which will be permitted and taxed by the state in the future. And all these degenerations will become major problems. In the future, there will also be more and more human beings who are confused in their consciousness, as well as suffering from severe depression and many other diseases, of a damaged consciousness and a damaged psyche. The origins of this will be rooted in the many effects and things of the exuberant overpopulation, such as in fanatically degenerating political, religious, sectarian delusions, religious and sectarian superstitions delusions, alcohol and drug-induced delusions, fantasies and illusions, unrealities, illusions of the senses, deceptions, delusional visions, wishful images, mirages, and suggested erroneous and confused inspirations of unscrupulous seducers. The rapidly increasing overpopulation will also have a very lasting and detrimental bad and evil effect on the morals as well as on the behavior, illnesses and sufferings of human beings as will result. For example, with regard to anancastic neuroses, impulsions, morbid passions, as well as with regard to manias, immoderate desires, and addictions, whereby also frenzy, raving madness, foolhardiness, rage, obsessive-compulsive disorder, obsessive-compulsive neurosis, and obsessive-compulsive disorders, etc., will be included. And overpopulation will also bring with it an effeminacy of thought, feeling and psyche of the body generally spreading in mankind, as well as an unsteadiness of life, so that even small strains and exertions will lead to hot flushes, fever, delirium, and collapse. But it will also result in strange imaginings, delusional phenomena, fantasies, unrealities, and vertigo. In the coming decades, and far into the third millennium, countless human beings will succumb to morbid thoughts, feelings, and thus confusions of consciousness and severe mental disorders, which will result in the future in a reduction of life control and quality of life, namely through a softening of life, also a lack of interest in life, a lack of courage to face life, and a weariness of life will become widespread and lead to many suicides. Also, a widespread indifference and lack of interest in the development of one's own consciousness, personal values of well-being, education, self-knowledge, and self-worth will become the order of the day, especially among many younger human beings. And what will be related to one's own personality in terms of indifference will also be transferred to others, and will increasingly prevent connecting relationships between human beings and finally dissolve them. This will not only lead to a lack of relationships in society, but also in families, acquaintances, friendships, and partnerships, whereby human beings will become strangers to each other, meaningless and indifferent, and will consequently all go their own ways. In the future, however, it will also be the case that many human beings will succumb to a non-control and atrophy of intellect and reason, as a result of a degenerating, destructive change in the ability of the consciousness to comprehend, understand, and process. And this will already begin to happen in the course of the next few decades, which will have a particularly detrimental effect on young and younger human beings in terms of their negative lifestyle and degeneration.
This is the text I wish to introduce into our conversation. This is because there is something else about it in this part of my father's annals that is off topic, but which you have not called up, and that is the following.
Your life will be a struggle, for there will be repeated attacks on your life, but you will have to be anxious to parry them yourself, for no one will be able to help you. In between, many adversaries will publicly try to cover you up with lies and slander, while they will superficially pretend to you, but insidiously try to frame you with lies and deceit dishonesty, and unrighteousness. Unfortunately, this will also be your wife, although you cannot avoid marriage with her, because only through this union, which you do not want, will you find the final step towards the fulfillment of your task. And through this, you will learn many things which you will then need for this. This will be the real reason that will break through to you again and again, unstoppably in memory, and drown out all your inner distress, cover it up and distract you from everything that will then constantly overload and fill you up and be ever present. But only through this will you then be unstoppably ready to break through that heaped up confusion and show, even if it is sometimes only hinting at it, your smile and your humor, which will stand above everything and make you invulnerable and sublime, whereby you can look down on everything without evil impulses. As your wife humiliates you, but turns herself into dry dust, and for a long time will no longer be able to bear her own created misery, and will flee in cowardice.
What is more, this refers to statements made by my father Svath to you in the autumn of 1948, which you then wrote on a Saturday and Sunday in 1949 as predictions, elaborated them, and sent them to several newspaper editors. The date was 13th and the 14th of May. I want to send you these predictions the day after tomorrow, Saturday, so that you can call them up and write them down and then perhaps publish the whole thing. Even then, as I have read in my father's annals, through his help you also gained insights into many false machinations of those unjust people in the governments and authorities who have worked and continue to work to the detriment of the people. And I think you should also say something about this in this day and age, because since 1949, things have got much worse in this respect.
I am aware of what you said earlier, but the one about, well, I did not want to write that down. I can still remember my prediction from 1949, and perhaps it is good if you pass it on to me and I can write it down. And perhaps it is also good if I follow your advice and once again talk turkey about it, as I did in 1949 and sent it to various newspapers, which of course never published anything because, as usual, they were too cowardly to do so, just as they did with my predictions. But as far as what you have read out is concerned, I think it is good that you have repeated your father's predictions. But the majority of stubborn earthlings talk into the wind of the desert, because they are only concerned with themselves, their own well-being, their own pleasure, their own possessions and fortunes, and with every personal advantage. However, little or no thought is given to the well-being of all human beings. The earth, its nature, fauna and flora, the atmosphere and the climate, nor to the well-being of the next human being in one's own family. This is also the reason why more and more family quarrels are taking place, whereby whole families are more and more frequently being wiped out by murder and manslaughter. Besides this, we have elements in the leaderships of states worldwide that are incapable of governing, such as in the EU dictatorship in particular and also in Germany, although the worst creature in this respect is currently ruling in the USA, namely Donald Trump, who is bringing the whole world into extremely threatening turmoil, just as most of his predecessors did. And if this madman and psychopath, who provokes political unrest worldwide and damages the financial and commodity economy, as well as spreading threats and creating mischief and spreading terror, is not stopped, then this lousy guy will manage to cause a huge war on Earth. This, however, will obviously not be noticed or even tolerated by all those who are obsessed with power around him, as it is also the case on the whole chain of countries on Earth, because all of them are equally obsessed with their power. In truth, there are only a few in all governments of all earthly states who really do not bask in obsession with power. But they hold back and do not dare to openly express their true opinion because they are afraid of losing their office. And while I'm at it, I can talk about what you think I should say about this again, as I did in 1949. In the meantime, I have learned a lot more about the same thing, which I will now explain as follows. What I have to say now will not please the majority of all rulers and authorities all over the world, because as usual I do not hold back with what is reality and truth, not even towards the rulers and authorities. And when I take aim at the majority of power-obsessed, self-important, arrogant, mendacious, alien to the people, and effectively incapable of governing government officials and authorities, and talk turkey about them, then I am effectively referring only to those fallible people who belong to this majority. So I am by no means talking about the people-oriented, righteous people of any government and authority officials who do their best and are unfortunately in the minority compared to the unrighteous. The righteous, who unfortunately do not get a chance among the unrighteous power-hungry and have to parry, so to speak, cannot do all that they want to do in the good and the best, because they are disregarded by the power-obsessed and prevented from acting in a way that is correct in terms of understanding, reason, and logic, as well as in terms of the people and the government. It must also be clear, however, that all the fallible members of the clique of unrighteous rulers and officials of both sexes dare to pretend to be righteous and close to the people in order to appear as belonging to the righteous minority. And they do this for their own personal advantage by deceiving the electorate, by pretending to be close to the people, good and progressive by means of lies, deceit, and empty as well as false and irredeemable promises, in order to get to the helm of government or to a civil servant's helm. And if they succeed in their fraudulent hypocrisy, then they use their one position contrary to what they have promised the electorate in a populist, liaristic manner, and have made them believe in acting, which is very easy for the power-obsessed. Because the majority of the people go along in psychological educational poverty and in ignorance and become obedient to the power-hungry for their empty and fraudulent mendacious promises. As a result, all the anti-people, anti-freedom and unrest, discord and lack of freedom as well as tax burdens among the people will regularly find themselves at the helm of government and in civil service positions and can work away as they wish in a damaging and anti-people manner. Of course, it will be the case that all the unjust, power-mad and autocratic people in governments and civil service, who, as usual, are good believers in religion and God, will find my words offensive and dispute them, because they do not want to stand by the truth and admit it, which undoubtedly corresponds to their rotten character traits and is rightly objectionable. This is exactly what I am doing with regard to all those rulers and heads of authorities who, as such rotten elements, exercise their might and self-importance to the suffering and harm of the citizens and the entire state population, but who also, as a result of their incompetence in financial matters, accumulate senseless mountains of debt, which then have to be paid for by the people. The fact is that the states and their populations are largely misgoverned by those incapable of governing, just as many of those incapable of governing are not capable of performing their duty in the manner demanded by the peoples. Instead of striving for peace and treating all human beings equally, they, like the majority of the peoples, are vicious and deceitful towards those of other faiths in their religious delusion and live out their personal and also communal religious hatred. And they also do this with regard to their xenophobia, namely in the name of their delusional God and his alleged love, as well as their alleged love and fellow humanity, which they greasily play on the outside, but immediately allow their hatred and all their evil violence against people of other faiths, other colors and foreigners to break through as soon as even something extremely minor happens that does not suit them. And the more profoundly they are addicted to their delusion of God, the more viciously and badly they rev up their hatred against people of other faiths, other colors and foreigners, resort to weapons and violence, and do not shy away from murder and manslaughter. And their role models are the unjust, power-hungry rulers and officials they have elected, who create strife, unrest, lack of freedom, and more tax burdens for the people in their own country. This, while in their delusions of grandeur and power, which are coupled with cowardly fear, they have nonsensical walls and death fences built around their states, either to prevent their own people from leaving the dictatorship in their own homeland, or to prevent people of other faiths, colors, and other foreigners from entering the country. In their own country, the civil and political rights of their own people are stifled by the unjust and power-mad rulers and officials, and the economy and trade with the rest of the world are also affected. Furthermore, social and cultural human rights are either impaired or completely stifled, which also includes freedom of speech and expression, etc., which is why hardly anyone or no one dares to openly say and describe what corresponds to the effective reality and truth. This is the case in many states, especially with regard to policies which, like many government decrees and court decisions, are directed against the freedom of individual human beings, or even against the whole people, as well as against justice. However, all unjust rulers and officials also use their obsession with power to terrorize other states, to threaten them, to insolently impose demands on them, and to drive their peoples into the greatest misery with trade and economic wars, as is done with punitive tariffs and sanctions. Sanctions in particular are to be understood as particularly criminal and inhuman machinations, because they are not only directed against the rulers who are in a clinch with another government imposing sanctions, because basically the entire people is always affected, who effectively have done nothing or can do nothing to bring about or lift this nonsense. And such sanctions are not only mindless, unreasonable, and inhumane, but clearly and distinctly to be described as crimes, because the populations of sanctioned states are deprived of their rights to acquire necessary necessities of life. Therefore, it is a fact that only criminal and inhuman and humanly degenerate elements, as miserable rulers, use their delusions of power to impose sanctions on other states. And if we look at all earthly governments and organizations, which are usually led by religious delusionists and believers in God's delusion, then we realize that these rulers or despots live out their desire for revenge against other state leaders who do not comply with the demands but preserve their own freedom of choice. And for this they are punished by the despots with sanctions, which in no way affect the rulers of the foreign states, but rather their populations, who in no way have anything to say and are not involved in governmental power, and are therefore innocent of the whole thing. Effectively, sanctions are dirty political machinations of coercion trivialized as punishment. The point is that foreign states to which unfulfillable demands are made disregard these demands, and are then forced by sanctions to comply with the foreign state's demands and fulfill them. This criminal behavior, which is politically described as a course of action and negative reinforcement of the demand, corresponds to nothing other than a malicious coercion, and thus an unparalleled injustice, which also creates malicious enmity. The despots of the USA who are incapable of governance, the elements of the EU dictatorship who are also incapable of governance, as well as the despotic leadership clique of the UN Security Council or the United Nations are mainly responsible for the exercise and imposition of sanctions, namely with regard to the decisions taken within the framework of the Common Foreign and Security Policy CFSP. A sanction corresponds in its basis to an embargo, which is founded on a state prohibition that no trade may be conducted with a certain state, which is to be forced to fulfill a demand by means of a sanction. By imposing sanctions, however, a state also withholds or confiscates foreign property, especially merchant ships. Now, in the above-mentioned relations, I am talking exclusively about those rulers and authorities who can be classified in the above-mentioned category, and whose actions and activities give cause for complaint. In doing so, I can, of course, only object to and despise their rotten thinking, their dishonesty, their wrong actions, their selfishness and self-importance, as well as their entire inhumane behavior, and thus their misguided, lousy and miserable character image, but not them as human beings, whom I have to respect, honor, and appreciate, and never condemn, and must also never do so. In contrast to those character image damaged and egoists who stand in the governments and authorities and do their wrong for their personal addiction to the exercise of power, self-exaltation and self-adulation, stand the righteous. These are all the others, but as a minority, namely the righteous and honest, who exercise their offices in honor and dignity and for the good of the people, and these are on the one hand to be considered as duty consciously elevated above the unrighteous, dishonest and people-damaging, and on the other hand also worthy of great thanks being expressed to them in an honorable and dignifying manner. As a rule, the majority is only eager to indulge in the exercise of power, self-importance, loudmouthness and adulation and acclaim by its followers. This is because the majority are incapable of fulfilling their governmental or official duties, because they have neither the necessary knowledge of governing and state management, nor the know-how of the authorities, nor the necessary expertise. And since this is the case, it costs all taxpayers immense state expenditures for the stupidity and lack of expertise of the majority of the government and public authority officials. And this is because this majority, broken down into individuals, are nothing more than rivets and zeros in their simple-mindedness and lack of leadership qualities, as well as in their lack of important expertise. This, however, is made up for at the expense of the taxpayers by hiring lobbyists who, for horrendous salaries, act as advisors to the incompetent in government and the authorities. This is because, as a rule, those in power who are elected by parties and not directly by the people are absolutely incapable of governing and deciding for the good of the people, as is true of all governments and authorities around the world. It is therefore the case that the majority of those who exercise governmental power and authority are, on the one hand, hugely mismanaging, but on the other hand, can only be at the helm because lobbyists act in an advisory capacity as saviors in times of need, and are actually those who, in truth, are basically the governmental and official conductors. Because of their ignorance of government and official leadership, they have no choice but to consult the lobbyists who advise them, who ingratiate themselves with the government and officials, and are in fact the actual government and officials. And for this they are paid unbelievably high compensation from taxpayers' money for their consultations, which ultimately run into millions. This is precisely because the parties, etc., and the peoples in their stupidity catapult rivets and zeros into the governments and authorities, who in their stupidity could only thresh empty straw, if they were at all capable of doing so, if it were not precisely a matter of mad dictatorial powerful people who indulge in despotism from the bottom up. Governmental and official rivets and zeros, however, even if they are so loudmouthed, self-important, powerful and arrogant in their stupidity, such as the old and new EU dictatorship powers, especially those in Germany, France and the USA, can only hold their posts, keep them, and collect high salaries because they squander millions of euros of state money in order to keep their personal office through their expensive lobbyist advisors and also have their state governed. Whether it is the top state leaders themselves, such as an autocratic EU dictator president or his equally green-eared zero, who has already spent millions of tax euros on her advisors as a result of her incompetence as war minister in Germany, it is all the same. This is also the case with her next loser, who is just as useless and who is nevertheless supposed to ascend to the chancellorship one day, which is why she has been elevated by the chancellor to the post of defense minister or even war minister, because as the still state powerful she lives under the delusion that she has to bring about a matriarchy in Europe with regard to the powers of the state. Now, I have a few things to say about the whole disgracefulness that the zero-value rulers and people of the authorities, etc., are incompetent zeros, but I do not want to attack or include in any way the just and righteous rulers and members of the authorities who do the best possible in their offices. My attack is only directed at those who understand nothing at all about the whole of governance, but only want to shine in their self-importance. So I am only talking about the majority of those who abuse their position of power and can only hold it, but cannot govern themselves, because they have lobbyists and advisors who are paid horrendous sums of taxpayers' money and act as the actual rulers. And all that is left to say is that these kind of loud-mouthed rulers sell the people as stupid, but the people know nothing about it and therefore cheer all the ineffectual zeros and rivets. Unfortunately, no citizen, or only very few, dare to talk about it in public, because they have to fear official reprisals, so that the majority of the so-called rulers and authorities can continue to work within the same framework. But it does not matter to me because I still dare to speak out and state the facts, even if people want to get on my back about it. It is true that this will also not change anything, because the people simply live laxly into the day and let the rulers and officials do to them what they want. I would also like to say that I respect, appreciate, and pay tribute to all righteous rulers and members of the authorities, and that I am also genuinely happy that these human beings do their best according to their abilities and possibilities. I value their attitude, their actions, their behavior, and their sense of responsibility just as highly as I value them as human beings. And I do so even if they can do little or nothing against the nonsense and the betrayal of the homeland by those who work maliciously and treacherously against the well-being of the people, as well as against the freedom and peace of the homeland, as we unfortunately also have such elements in the government, in the authorities, and among the people in Switzerland, who, due to stupidity and lack of intelligentum, or being intelligent, want to shamefully sell out our homeland to the enslaving EU dictatorship, with 0 sense and 0 reason. That, my friend, is what needs to be said about the present time. However, the way I now assess Trump, well, not as a human being, because as such he is taboo for me. Absolutely unassailable and with integrity. In terms of his mindset, his character, and his behavior, he is obviously not only contradictory in public, but also within himself. In addition, he is also a confused loudmouth, and is unable to assess what he is doing to other peoples, and thus also to their religious faith with his insane orders, commands, threats, and racist insults. All his behavior in this regard is not only stupid and simple-minded, but so degenerate that not even human beings who still live as savages and primitives somewhere in the densest bush and have no idea whatsoever about civilization. Trump is, moreover, a mind deceiver who plays the powerful and strong man in government and in public, but at the bottom of his being is an absolute coward, and in his private life is small and ugly and pretends to be bland and decent because he is cowardly afraid that he could be attacked and suffer any harm. And that he is creating mischief in the USA through his racial hatred and his xenophobia and his otherwise stupidly primitive views, opinions, utterances, and speeches, he cannot grasp. So he also cannot understand that he drives his morally unstable followers of both sexes, who are incapable of understanding and reason, into an unthinking hatred through his idiocy, who then go berserk and in their madness of hatred senselessly and ruthlessly murder innocent human beings if possible en masse. But the obviously logic-deficient megalomaniac, in his self-conceit, is unable to assess this, because in his imbecility he believes he is above everything and perhaps even the great savior of U.S. America, or the creator of the universe. And that in his primitive mind and in his manifold hatred, which, however, he mendaciously denies and moreover wants to exterminate other haters by the death penalty, he conjures up evil calamities he is incapable of understanding, let alone even recognizing. In his catastrophically degenerated, stupid, and impudent behavior, he also includes the refugees who migrate from South American countries and want to reach the USA via Mexico. This, however, creates immense misery and causes many deaths that have to be accounted for on his conscience, which, in his indifference to the welfare and well-being of his fellow human beings, neither concerns nor burdens him, because he regards these human beings only as vermin that have to be trampled on. Basically, Trump puts only his own well-being above every well-being and woe of every other human being. And thus he makes it clear that he also puts his personal well-being above all the well-being and woe of all Earth humans. Therefore, this is also at the forefront of his politics, and especially in the context of U.S. aspirations for world domination, and America must be great and powerful, which is why he is also harassing other states with his crazy and unpredictable demands, false accusations, threats, and with idiotic tariffs, and putting at risk worldwide the otherwise already fragile world peace.
Trump is a comedic actor. And as you describe him, that is also exactly true, as is the great danger he poses to the entire world. Yet all his supporters are stupid and do not recognize his dangerous unpredictability. The man is not only an actor, but also a hypocrite, who pretends to be conciliatory, affable, and peaceful in order to make good weather for himself. As you are wont to say, yet he is imperious and willing to destroy the still existing weak approach to world peace and the entire, still partly existing world order for his lust for power. He is ready to plunge the world and Earth humans into hopeless ruin, as was also Hitler's intention, but which he failed to implement. In this sense, Trump also promotes racism, hatred of nations, hatred of religion as well as left-wing and right-wing extremism, violence and degenerations with armed force, etc. But we should not be talking about that now. We should be talking about what your friend brought up, which I think you should speak up and then also publish the whole thing. What you have learned from my father Shvath is more than I now know, for I have now first of all the duty to familiarize myself with his annals, as I also have to look around in our new library and still have much to fathom and learn. Since our last conversation on the 14th of June, I have not been able to get away from it and have spent all the time possible to me in fathoming many things and acquiring new knowledge, which is completely new and immeasurable to me. And when I think that you have known all this all your life, but that at my age I have to learn much of it, then I can only bow down before you, Edouard, dear friend. And the new learning of the immeasurably extensive knowledge has only now become possible for me, as also for our peoples, because you have made known to us the sign how we could find and open the entrance. Since we have been in contact with each other, you have kept silent about it, which is why I only came across the whole of your real task when I began to study the annals of my father Shvath at your request. What I have learned in the library since the 14th of June, at least what I have been able to explore and learn so far, far exceeds my expectations. So I also think that you are now, with your knowledge, which you already learned from my father as a boy and also explored a great deal yourself, as I know from my father's annals, better able to explain the facts we have addressed regarding earthly overpopulation and its destructive manipulations of the planet, its nature, fauna, and flora, the atmosphere, and the climate.
Ptaah, for my part, I do not have a monopoly on omniscience, nor do I have absolute wisdom. But nevertheless, I will endeavor to state and explain the pertinent and authoritative facts. Some of it I can still pull out of my memories, but I must honestly admit that not everything is familiar to me anymore, which is why I have to pick it out of my memory bank. And what Shvath taught me or what I get from my memory bank, I naturally form according to my own use of language and in relation to the present time, but I try not to add my own interpretations to what Shvath said, but to stick only to what he said. Before I begin, however, I would like to ask you a question, if I may.
You know you can always ask.
Of course I know that, but what I want to ask would be purely private.
You know that since we've had our friendship, we've never kept secrets from each other.
Good, thanks. Well, how can I say yes? When you ended our conversation so abruptly on the 14th of June and walked away, it was really abrupt. The look on your face was strange, to which I would like to say that it seemed so perplexed to me, just as if you had been struck and affected and fallen from all clouds.
As usual, you are good at putting things into words and explaining them as they are. So you also observed me correctly and judged my sudden mental state at that time correctly, because what you said last affected me. In fact, I was stunned and perplexed, as you put it. It was a bit much all at once, and moreover, I was not prepared for it because
That's good, thanks, Ptaah. That is clear to me now, so we do not need to talk about it anymore.